Item next, we will go right to, let's go right to Representative Wiener here. We've got, it's House File 812. If you could provide your, or tell us about your bill, and then we'll bring Madden up. Is there anyone else on this bill that wishes to testify for the bill or with concerns? Okay, that's pretty clear cut then. Representative Wiener, to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members. And I apologize. Yesterday, we had a full committee room. All the seats were filled for my bill, and unfortunately, the weather didn't work out, and it got pushed back. So, next time. Well, thank you. This is a common sense bill. This is tax relief for the hardest working people in the state of Minnesota. Our state did not have income taxes until 1933. And since that time, we've become the highest marginal state, individual income tax, and it's got the highest rates at the bottom income bracket. We are taxing people out of our state. We're uncompetitive with our neighbors. Iowa, Wisconsin, South Dakota, North Dakota all have lower tax brackets than we do. Iowa has a 3.9 single rate. Wisconsin has a 3.5 lowest bracket. South Dakota has no income tax, and North Dakota has a graduated income tax ranging from 1.95 to 2.5. Taxpayers across the state of Minnesota have been saying the same thing. We need relief. We had an $18 billion surplus. Campaign promises across the state at all levels where we were going to make Minnesota affordable. Promises of $2,000 tax return or returns to people never came to fruition. Property tax relief never happened, and unfortunately, we ended up with more unfunded mandates. We're creating a situation in our state where the hardest working people are paying the most and they're suffering the most. And this would cut that lowest tax bracket in order to make life livable in Minnesota. So, imagine, if you will, you're making under $38,000 a year. If this bill were passed, it would be like getting 50 cents to $1 per hour onto your check. That could be huge. That's transformative. Historic was the terminology we heard the last 2 years. Passing a bill like this would be historic for the taxpayers of the state of Minnesota. Now, I understand that not every bill is perfect coming out of the gates, and I would love to work with other individuals to make this a priority bill moving forward. There has been some suggestions, and I'm open to different ideas. Sorry, I'm on the wrong page here. And I'm open to ideas to make this a better bill. One of the ideas was to move the tax brackets, and I'm sure Nan will be talking about that a little bit. That was an amendment I had looked at, wasn't necessarily put in this bill, but I'm willing to discuss that further with other individuals. Now, I know in the state of Minnesota, we're also looking at a tax deficit. Huge. If this bill were to be passed, we would have a deficit in our state, or it would leave us with a budget, or a hole in our budget, which kind of turns into a circular argument. We can't cut the tax bracket because we need the revenue to pay for the programs to help the people in the lowest tax bracket. This bill helps those people out. It's a common sense bill. Let's move it forward. And in closing, I would just like to say, I'm sure we all on the tax committee have our favorite economists that we like to, read at all hours in the morning. Whether it's Hayek's, probably Hayek, Marx, Kenzie. My favorite is Milton Friedman. And the quote I love from him is, "I'm in favor of cutting taxes under any circumstance, for any excuse, for any reason, whenever it's possible." This bill is a good start in that direction. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Representative Wiener. Let's go to witnesses. We have Nan Madden. If you would please introduce yourself and who you represent for the record, and then provide your testimony. Then we'll go to member questions. This is a bill that we would lay over, so we're not going to actually vote on it today, but I just want to, okay. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Nan Madden. I'm the Minnesota Budget Project Director at the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. I am testifying today with concerns about House File 812. I do appreciate and share Representative Wiener's goal of using our tax policy to improve the lives of everyday Minnesotans, but this bill as it's drafted is not a good tool for that goal. And it has the same problem as other proposals we've seen that would change the rate in the first bracket. Those proposals are not well targeted to folks struggling to get ahead, and everyday folks would be harmed by the cuts in public services that would likely happen to pay for these tax cuts. The revenue analysis from the Department of Revenue estimates that 20% of Minnesota income tax filers would not receive any benefit from this proposal. These are folks that are paying taxes to fund state and local services in Minnesota. They just happen to pay their taxes more through the sales tax and the property tax. And at the same time that one of 5 Minnesotans are left out, higher income Minnesotans would receive annual tax cuts of over $2,500 for married filing joint returns and over $1,700 if filing single. It's not necessary to give tax cuts to high income households if the goal is helping everyday Minnesotans. So why is this the case that many lower income folks are left out or get a smaller cut and those with higher incomes get larger tax cut in a bill that's focused on the first bracket? It goes back to the fact that Minnesotans do not pay income tax on all of our income, but on a smaller measure that's called taxable income. And only those households that have taxable incomes that reach the top of the first tax bracket would get the maximum tax cut. So the maximum tax cuts goes to folks whose taxable incomes reaches into the second, third, and top brackets. So I'll give you an example of a family that does not get the maximum tax cut from this proposal. We'll take a married couple of 2 children, an adjusted gross income of $60,000, and a fairly simple tax return. So they claim the standard deduction as well as a dependent exemption for each of their 2 children. And I want to flag that the dependent exemption is a very positive feature of Minnesota's income tax code, that we take family size into account in determining taxable income. So that family with AGI of $60,000, their taxable income is under $20,000. So not high enough to hit the top of the first bracket. They would get a smaller tax cut from this bill than a family with higher incomes. And if this family had more children, because of those additional dependent exemptions, they would get an even smaller tax cut, if any, and they'd be even further away from the amount of income they would need, taxable income they would need to get the maximum tax cut under this bill. At a cost of roughly $4 billion a year, this expensive tax cut would come at the cost of deep cuts to services that Minnesotans count on. This is a time when federal policymakers are considering drastic cuts in funding for states, especially in healthcare, which is a very important area of the budget for our Minnesota families. Cutting taxes at this time would make it harder to protect the services that Minnesotans count on, not only healthcare, but also supports for seniors and people with disabilities, schools, transportation, and other crucial services. And I think it's the folks who are struggling the most to get by who would feel the greatest harm from those cuts to services, while those who are better off would receive larger tax cuts. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any questions for the testifier, Ms. Madden? Thank you so much. Now, questions for members for the author. Okay, would the department like to weigh in? Okay. Any questions? With that, I'll renew my motion.
Mr. Chair.
Oh,
Just if I could wrap up on the bill.
oh,
because it's time.
absolutely,
Or
absolutely.
if anybody else.
Was
has
anybody,
questions.
did I miss somebody?
We were just trying to get organized over here. We couldn't.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate this bill, Representative Wiener. I think your intentions are pure here in trying to help lower income individuals in the state of Minnesota. I just don't think this bill does that. It is a very expensive bill. I think the price tag is, depending on the biennium, about $8 billion, which is quite a large price tag. And I want to direct members of the committee to the memo that was written by Mr. Williams that is included in the packets. Table 1 models the distribution of tax reductions by income tax year 2025. And you look at that, and I think despite the intentions of the bill, the actuality of the bill is that most of the benefits of this bill would go to the highest income Minnesotans. In fact, those who have an income of greater than 100,000 will account for 53.7%, almost 54% of the decrease in revenue from the state. And the lower incomes, those that earn less than 30,000, only get 2% of the decrease that this tax cut creates. And then if you look at that far left column, the number of returns, you see that the people who make more than 100,000 are the minority of people in this state. It's only 40% of the returns we get. So they're getting 54% of the benefit for only 40% of the people. And the people who need it the most are getting the least out of this deduction. So I appreciate the intent behind this bill, but I just don't think this is the way that we help people who are most in need in the state. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Smith. Representative Gomez, want to wrap it up?
Yeah, I mean, Andy sort of said it. This has cost $17 billion, right, in your manner of accounting. $17 billion hole in the side of our budget, and what do you think is going to happen? Are we going to be able to cut $17 billion in spending? Or, because that is how a budget works. You either have to make up with it for other revenues, and as we know in this committee, the income tax is why we have the most progressive tax code in the country, the most progressive state tax code out of the 50 states in DC, is because we have an income tax. And as we've said, are you going to cut money for our schools? Are you going to cut human services dollars for seniors, for people with disabilities? Are you going to cut nursing homes? Are you going to cut roads and bridges? Are you going to cut investment in law enforcement, public safety? Are we going to cut funding for our counties and for our cities? If we were talking about $17 billion, we'd have to do all of those things. All of those things. And, the benefits of this tax cut disproportionately go to the top income earners in the state. And as Ms. Madden pointed out, it's not that lower income people don't pay taxes. They pay them in the more regressive major tax types that we have. They pay through the sales tax and through the property tax. And as we've discussed extensively in this committee, when you decrease the share of public services that the state pays for, you put those costs onto our local partners. And what are the tax tools that our local partners have at their disposal? The most regressive forms of tax, particularly the property tax, which we actually all hear about when we go in our communities. So, this is just I understand the intent. This is using a chainsaw to do something that a scalpel should be doing if you really want to help low-income people, which I genuinely believe you do, Representative Wiener, because we've talked about, your constituents and the kind of average income level of your constituents. And I think that, I probably have way more rich people in my district, but some of the characteristics of our districts align. The low-income people in my community have the same needs as the low-income people in your community. But this 54% of the tax cut of the $17 billion that would go to, the top income earners in Minnesota, who it just really doesn't kind of even out and doesn't achieve the intent. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Wiener, like to wrap it up?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, committee. And as I said, I'd be more than willing to work with anybody to make this bill better. And as I stated before, by adjusting the tax brackets, we could target the lowest individuals here. Instead of helping make this bill better, automatically it's all or nothing. We are in these committees supposed to and expected to work together to a certain extent. And instead of doing that, it's automatically torpedoing a bill that we could improve on, which is really disappointing. Because instead of helping those the people in the lowest tax bracket, you're gonna say it's all or nothing. I wanna help those people out. You know the intent. And instead of working together, that's not gonna happen. In the state of Minnesota here, our state budget has more than doubled in the last 10 years. We've gone from $35 billion to over $70 billion. And no one is saying, what does this do to the taxpayers out there? We're talking about how it affects our budget, our state budget. But what about the workers themselves? The people who are basically being crushed in this state by an ever-expanding government and tax burden that's literally driving them out. As I stated, I would love to work with anybody on this bill to make it better, and instead of working with them, we decided that it's an all-or-nothing bill, and that's disappointing. I intend to work for the people in this state. The lowest tax bracket primarily, we can start there. We could have offered an amendment to make this better, and I would have loved to work with that. So, moving forward, once again, I'm gonna quote Milton Friedman, because I'm sure everybody else loves to hear this. I'm in favor of cutting taxes under any circumstances, for any excuse, for any reason, whenever it is possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Wiener moves that House File 812 be later for possible inclusion in the omnibus tax bill. Thank you, Representative Wiener. Thank you, Ms. Madden.